I have a very long presentation, but before I begin, I will just say that I'm, Roberta, so glad to have been at the 2050, now almost 10 years ago, and my elder daughter now plays the trombone, and I think it's largely because of the beatbox workshop that she learned how to blow like that, and so...
I didn't teach that workshop.
No, I'm looking at her because the other thing is I wanted to say it's really nice to see people again from those magical, conflictual, delightful times. And Frances Crowe is still alive, and I said to her day before yesterday that I was coming for this, and she sent her regards. Almost the world's oldest radical, after Grace Lee Boggs. All right, so I'll read because I'm getting older and I can't remember. I'm not as clever as you. I can't just speak full sentences, so bear with me. It'll take about, 15 minutes. Yeah, that's okay. When you want me to stop, I can just stop. Reports and rumors filter out of government documents and family distress signals to locate precisely the ongoing devaluation and devastation of social life in the United States. Unemployment rates linger at perilously high levels, with the effective rate in some cities, such as Detroit, stumbling on with half the population without waged work. Home foreclosures fail to slow down, and sheriffs and debt recovery paramilitaries scour the landscape for the delinquents. Personal debt has escalated as ordinary people with uneven means of earning livings turn to banks and to the shady world of personal loan agencies to take them to the other side of starvation. Researchers at the RAND Corporation tell us that absent family support, poverty rates among the elderly will be about double what they are now. Economist Nancy Folber of UMass, her invisible heart is trying its best to hold back the noxious effects of the invisible hand. Swaths of the American landscape are now given over to desolation. Abandoned factories make room for chimney swallows and the heroin trade, as old farmhouses become homes for methamphetamine labs and the sorrows of broken rural dreams. Returning to his native Indiana, my friend Jeffrey St. Clair writes, "My grandfather's farm is now a shopping mall. The black soil, milled to such fine fertility by the Wisconsin glaciation, is now buried under a sea of black asphalt. The old Bortonwright pig farm is now a quick lube, specializing in servicing SUVs. Into this bleak landscape, St. Clair moans, we are a hollow nation, a poisonous shell of our former selves. What growth comes to the economy is premised upon the inventions and discoveries of a fortunate few, those who were either raised with all the advantages of the modern world or who were too gifted to be held back by centuries of hierarchies. Biochemists and computer engineers, as well as musical impresarios and film producers, they devise a product, patent it, and then mass produce it elsewhere, in Mexico or China, Malaysia or India. These few collect rent of their inventions and hire lawyers and bankers to protect their patents and to grow their money. Around them, in their gated communities, exists a ring of service providers, from those who tend to their lawns to those who teach their children, from those who cook their food to those who protect them. Those many who would once have been employed in mass industrial production to actually make the commodities that are invented by the few are now no longer needed. They have become and have been rendered disposable, unnecessary to the political economy of accumulation. These many survive in the interstices of the economy, either with part-time jobs or crowded into family shops, either with off-the-books legal activity or off-the-books illegal activity. The struggle for survival is acute. Only 37% of unemployed Americans receive jobless benefits, which amount to $293 per week. And only 40% of very poor families who qualify for public assistance actually are able to claim it. Strikingly, the new recession has hit hard against low-wage service jobs with no benefits, which are mainly held by women. In recession times, these women with these jobs stretch their invisible hearts across their families. Now, even this love-fueled glue is no longer available. The few luxuriate, the many vegetate. This is the social effect of high rates of inequality, the trick of jobless growth. When I first got involved with Project 2050 about 10 years ago, I was interested in its premise. By the year 2050, the United States was slated to be a majority-minority country. Or to put it bluntly, more people who claim their descent from outside Europe would populate the country. This worried Harvard political scientist Samuel Huntington, who wrote in an influential foreign policy article in 2004, and he writes, "The persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into two peoples, two cultures, and two languages. Unlike past immigrant groups, Mexicans and other Latinos have not assimilated into mainstream American culture, forming instead their own political and linguistic enclaves from Los Angeles to Miami, and rejecting the Anglo-Protestant values that built the American dream. The United States ignores this challenge at its peril." That was Huntington. Not me. Sometimes I write like that, but only in my dreams. And there are other people I hate. Globalization hollows out the core of the nation's manufacturing, devastates the social basis of its culture, and threatens the integrity of its people, and yet it is the migrant who bears the cross. Illusions about the social glue of Anglo-Protestantism, which whips between the Declaration of Independence and chattel slavery, provide the only outlet for Huntington's frustrations. There is no authentic cultural project to attract the new migrants, to encourage them to find shelter in these Anglo-Protestant values. Huntington knows that these have run their course, or were never such strong magnets in the first place. Huntington's fearful panic can only be mollified by the prison house of border walls, the Minutemen, the Border Patrol agents, SB 170, English-only ordinances, and so on. Force alone can govern Huntington's vision. It no longer can breed consent. Culture gives way to force. 2050 is far off. Closer still is 2016. It is the date chosen by the International Monetary Fund in its World Economic Outlook report from 2011 to signal the shift for the world's largest economy, from the United States to China. We are within a decade of that monumental turn, with the US having to surrender its dominant place for the first time since the 1920s. The collapse of the US economy is a sign of autumn, as the historian Ferdinand Braudel put it. Our autumn is China's springtime. Linked to this date, this 2016 date, is yet another, 2034. US government data shows that by 2034, the United States will have a rate of inequality that matches Mexico. The United States today is more unequal than Pakistan and Iran. That is by Gini coefficients, if you're not interesting to you. Just accept my result. Okay. The rate of inequality has risen steadily since 1967. It is going to become catastrophic by 2034. By 2050, the country will be minority-majority. By 2034, it will be as unequal as Mexico, with an economy shrinking and formal unemployment steadily rising. By 2050, people of color, or maybe by 2042, people of color will inherit a broken country, one that is ready to be turned around for good, not ill. Are we prepared for this world? Well, the first question is, who is we? Not the political class in the United States. It is incapable of dealing with the transformation. It is deluded into the belief that the United States can enjoy another American century, and that if only the Chinese revalue their currency, everything would be back to the golden age. It is also deluded into the belief that the toxic rhetoric about taking back the country is going to silence the darker bodies who have tasted freedom since 1965 and want more of it. The idea of taking back the country produces what Ajaz Ahmed calls cultures of cruelty. By cultures of cruelty, Ajaz means the wider web of social sanctions in which one kind of violence can be tolerated all the more because other kinds of violence are tolerated anyway. police brutality and domestic violence, ICE raids against undocumented workers and comical mimicry of a foreign accent, aerial bombardment in the borderlands of Afghanistan, and sanctified misogyny in our cinema. These forms of routine violence set the stage for a more generalized ethical numbness toward cruelty. It is on this prepared terrain of cruelty that the forces of the far right, the Tea Party for instance, can make its hallowed appearance, ready to dance on the misfortunes and struggles of the migrants, the workers, and the dispossessed. The pre-existing cultures of cruelty sustain the far right and allow it to appear increasingly normal, taking back the country from you-know-who. The right's menagerie sniffs at all the opportunities. It is prepared, exerting itself, feeding off a culture that has delivered a disarmed population into its fangs. They are ready for 2034 and 2050, but only in the most harmful way. We are unprepared. Our social bloc is less organized than it was a generation ago. Union membership is down, but so too is active membership in the civil rights organizations, many of which have become non-profit organizations reliant upon foundations more than the dues from active members. More radical outfits are having a hard time surviving, unable to grow from the energy of their members. Mass mobilizations take place occasionally, but their energy is rarely gathered into powerful entities that are able to make claims on a political class that seems to have lost the plot. 2034 and 2050 call out for a more mature political landscape. To clear the way for it, to prepare for it, we need to germinate intense cultural activity, to penetrate new ideas into the domain of culture, to lift the conversation from the day-to-day to new horizons, to the potential of creating new political spaces, new epochs. This cultural work calls upon intellectuals and artists to set aside some time for the future. No longer the concerns of one's own temperament alone. I mean, this is obvious to us. Arts for art's sake, academic work for career's sake, but also work for the new horizon, to inaugurate a new humanity. This does not mean that art or intellectual work must be collapsed onto political projects. That would reduce its capacity to break through the present's dilemmas. We need thought to create a passionate fervor, to find and found a new culture. When hope is so poorly organized to reshape culture, we expect too much from intellectuals and artists. We ask us to do the work of transformation. Because we do not tend to the gap between intellectual and artistic production on one side and the organized work of transformation on the other, we slip into an aesthetics of gloom or one of disdain or of detachment. The artist and intellectual cannot transform reality in an unmediated fashion. It is our task to allude to reality, to draw attention to certain problems, even to provide understanding of them. But art cannot define the means which will make it possible to remedy these effects. For that, one needs fighting organizations that are driven by a different kind of knowledge, a science of society that has a theory of the mechanics that produce the social effects that are depicted by art, that are produced by art. For that, we need organizations. We need to belong to something. When the art form is to carry the enormous burden of political theory and of praxis, it is diminished. There is room here to question the lack of gap between art and politics, not to champion art for art's sake, but to maintain the distance between what art can do and what a science of society can do. We need to be linked to political organizations. The time for that is ever now. Project 2050 was an incubator, the kind of experiment we need to create across the country, alluding to reality with conversations between artists and intellectuals, and at the same time doing something that many such projects don't do. That is creating democratic audiences. Not spectators, but as Augusto Boal used to say, spectators. The toxic soup of our present draws from the worst inventory of the past to blind us to those who struggle to survive. And that's what we call stereotypes. If the disposable make it into art or into intellectual production, they do so with the heavy weight of disdain on their undernourished shoulders. Sociological theories of the culture of poverty or troubled discussions about art that depicts the life of the poor comes from a lack of ability to grasp the superficial reality of harsh life. Life is bare, but not empty, not without humanity. The spectator sees the bareness, not the humanity. Part of alluding to reality is to shift the spectator and insist that as spectators, they see the humanity and the resilience. To produce art and intellectual work about the disposable populations is as important as the act of teaching ourselves how to read, how to see, how to explore the contradictions of our society. Cultures of cruelty and cultures of stereotype rely upon the viewer, the reader, to be passive, to consume cultural artifacts and intellectual products. Experiments like 2050 pose another question, not one of what must be created or written alone, but how must we see, how must we read? This kind of struggle over reception, the sharpening of the critical construction of culture, is what helps break the chain of commodification. And if I have one more minute, may I read my favorite poem to end?
Very good with your self-timing.
Yeah. This is my favorite poem. It is from Brecht, 1938. I'll read the whole thing and then, okay? But I won't read it as beautifully as you. I wish you could sing this poem. Anyway, never mind. Brecht would appreciate it if you sang it. He would find me rather wooden.
Excellent.
Anyway. The critical attitude strikes many people as unfruitful. That is because they find the state impervious to their criticism. But what in this case is an unfruitful attitude is merely a feeble attitude. Give criticism arms and states can be demolished by it. Canalizing a river, grafting a fruit tree, educating a person, transforming a state. These are instances of fruitful criticism and at the same time instances of art. Thanks.